Hi there. Welcome to the new video in Appium tutorial series for Appium 2.0. In this series, we have already seen about introduction to Appium 2.0 as well as how you can set up your machine for Appium 2.0. If you have not seen those videos, I'll be putting the link over there, which you can check that out later. So in today's video, we'll look into Appium Inspector, where we will see how you can use Appium Inspector to inspect the elements, as well as what all the other features which Appium 2.0 has for us, which we can use in our mobile automation testing. So without waiting any further, let's start with today's video. Before we start with Appium Inspector and go in detail, let's first understand what is Appium Inspector. Appium Inspector is a desktop-based application which helps us in inspecting the elements for our Android and iOS applications. It is available for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux machines. So if you have any of these machines, you can simply download the application and install it on your machine. If you don't want to install this Appium Inspector application, you don't need to worry. There is a web version also available, which you can directly browse and start using. Now, why you should use Appium Inspector? Basically, it is very easy for you to use Appium Inspector to inspect the elements for both Android and iOS applications. And it is also helpful in debugging different actions and finger gestures on the element as well as on the device. So you can debug such actions and gestures very easily with Appium Inspector. Appium Inspector also supports both Android and iOS applications. Now let's set up Appium Inspector on our machine. First, we'll download the Appium Inspector and then we'll install it. So for downloading Appium Inspector, you need to navigate to the Appium Inspector GitHub repository, the link for which I'll be providing it in the description box below, so you can check that out. So you need to go to the releases section and click on releases. We'll find the latest release for Appium Inspector. As you can see, this is the latest release for Appium Inspector, and these are the executables which are available. So it has all the executable depending on the different types of platforms. So if you are on the Windows machine, you can download the .exe file. If you are on a Mac machine, you can download the .dmg file. And if you are on a Linux machine, you can download the .app image. Right. So on my machine, I have already downloaded and installed the .dmg file. I'll just start this application and I'll show it. So this is how Appium Inspector will look like when you first start the application on your machine. I'll just increase the size of the window. So let's first understand the window, what we have here. So here you can provide the host name and port number on which the Appium server is running, as well as the base path of the Appium server. You can also provide advanced settings like allow unauthorized certificates as well as proxy settings if you are having any proxy on your machine where you are connected to a company VPN. In that case, we need to provide that proxy. And these are the capabilities section where you can build the capabilities and you can save as a preset. So in case if you want to reuse any capability, you can reuse it very easily. And here there are different set of cloud providers which you can use and connect to the devices of these cloud providers. Now we have already installed the Appium Inspector. The next step is to inspect the elements. So let's first inspect Android application elements. So for inspecting Android application, I'll be using a demo application which is provided by WebDriver.io. So this is the demo app which has been created by the WebDriver.io team. So I'll just download the latest version of this application on my machine. So this is the application, how it looks, and we will be automating this application. So we'll download the .apk file since we are automating Android application. So let's wait till the application is getting downloaded. You can see this application has been downloaded. Now let's create a capability for our Android application which we have just downloaded. So let's create a capability in the inspector. First property we'll be adding is the platform name. This I'll be giving as Android. Next I'll be giving platform version. This I'll give as 11. Next I'll be giving the device name. This I'll be giving as Pixel 6 Pro. Next, I'll be giving the automation name. Since we have installed a separate Android driver called UI Automator 2, I'll be giving that as a automation name. Next, I'll be giving the capability called AVD. So with this capability, we don't need to launch the emulator manually. The Appium server will automatically launch the emulator for us. To get the emulator name, let's come to the terminal and run the command emulator space -list -avds. So if you have seen my last video where I showed you how to set up your machine for Appium, if you have followed the steps correctly, you would be able to execute this command successfully. So once you execute this command, you will get the list of emulators you have created on your machine, and you will get the name of the emulator. So you just need to copy the emulator name and paste it in the AVD capability. Last capability which is required is the app capability, where I'll be selecting it as a type of file path and browse the APK file which I have just downloaded. Now I'll save this capability as a preset. I'll give the name as Android WDIO. Now you can see that this capability is saved in this tab. Now after this, I need to start the Appium server. For that, I'll come to the terminal again. I'll give the command Appium server with the address localhost port as 4723 and use drivers as UI automator 2. Here I have not given the base path flag. If you want to use base path as WD hub, you can give the base path like this using --base path space WD/hub. Now in this example, I'll be skipping this flag and I'll press enter. This has started the Appium server. Now I'll start the session on the Appium Inspector, which will connect to this running Appium server. I'll click on start session. You can see that this session is connected to the running Appium server. Now this will launch the Android emulator. Let's wait till the emulator has launched successfully and the application has installed. So you can see the application has been launched. This will fail eventually because we need to provide an activity name. As you can see, when the app launched, it launched with a splash screen. So we need to wait for the main activity. Let's first check out the error which we have got. Splash activity never started. So by default, Appium is trying to wait for this splash activity, which will never start. It will just come and eventually it will disappear and the main activity will launch. So let's find the actual name of the main activity. In the console logs, let's scroll a little bit upwards. Here we can see the fully qualified activity name, which we need to wait. You need to copy this name, and in the inspector, you need to add one more capability called app wait activity and give the activity name here. If you have noticed, when we start the session, this Appium colon has been appended automatically. If you notice this checkbox, automatically add necessary Appium vendors prefix on start. So this prefix is required for the W3C protocol to kick in. So mostly you are aware that Appium 2.0 is running on W3C protocol. So in order to run it in W3C protocol, we need to have Appium colon as a prefix to the capabilities, except for the platform name and browser. So these two capabilities are just the only exceptions. Apart from that, all the activity will have a prefix. Now let's start this session. This time it will not give any error and it should launch the application successfully in the inspector. Let's wait till the application gets launched. So you can see that the application has launched successfully. I'll just rearrange the screen so it is side by side. Now you can see that you can select the element and you can see the locator and all the attributes of the element being displayed on the screen. In the middle, it is the app source, which is nothing but an XML tree, which represents the application user interface and all the elements which make up the UI. So there are all the elements which are visible on the screen. You can select any element and you can see the attributes of that. Sometimes the elements are not automatically displayed in this center XML tree. So you need to scroll down a little bit to see the name. Here you can see the accessibility ID has automatically been displayed. Now with Android, there is a trick which you can use to speed up the process of finding the elements for the Android application. You can add one more capability called Appium settings. And here you need to give a setting name as ignore unimportant views and close the bracket. Here you need to select a boolean and select it as true and save this capability and start the session. So this will start the session with just the minimal locators which are visible to the user. So you can see that earlier we were getting a cluster of XML elements, but this time we are just seeing those elements which are actually visible to the user. So this way it will speed up the time it takes for the finding the element. Now let's inspect element for iOS application. Now I'll download this .zip file, which is nothing but an application for iOS simulator. I'll click on this application and let's wait till the application gets downloaded. Now I'll create another capability set for iOS. I can simply reuse that capability set and just update it for iOS. Here I'll update platform name as iOS and platform version as 16.4, and here the device name I'll give iPhone 14, and here automation name I'll be giving as XCUI. AVD name we don't require it for iOS, we'll remove it. I'll browse the .app.zip file which I have just downloaded, and here I don't need to give the app wait activity. I can simply remove it. I can also remove this setting, ignore unimportant views, since it is specifically for Android and it will not work on iOS. I'll remove this. I'll click on Save As to save this as an iOS preset. I'll give this iOS preset name as the iOS WDIF and I'll click on Save. Now I'll come to the terminal to start the Appium server, which will help in starting the Appium Inspector session for iOS. I'll use the command Appium server with localhost as an address and port 4723. Here I'll be giving use drivers as all. So this will enable all the drivers which are installed on my machine. I'll press enter. Now I'll start the session for iOS. So this will launch the simulator automatically. It will install the application and it will launch the application. So let's wait till this application gets launched successfully on the simulator. This process will take some time only for the first time when you start the session on the iOS device. After that, it will be much faster. So only for the first time, it will take some time to launch the application on iOS. As you can see, this application has been launched successfully and the inspector is also able to inspect the elements on the application. You can select any element and it will show its attributes and properties which you can use to identify these elements when you perform your test automation. So you can select all these elements and see that it is able to identify those locators. Sometimes it happens that for iOS application, the elements are not easily selected. In that case, you can scroll this XML tree and try to search the elements manually. In case if that element is not selected properly, this is a known issue and it happens for some of the applications. Now let's check out the common locator strategies which are available in Appium. Which you can use for both Android and iOS applications. So first locator strategy is the accessibility ID. So for Android, it is an accessibility label, and for iOS, it is the test ID, which is set by the developers for all the different elements of the application. Now let's check that locator strategy accessibility ID over here. So as you can see, once these properties are set in the application code base, this property will be visible in the inspector. As you can see for this element, that you can see the accessibility ID over here. Similarly, for all these elements, the accessibility label has been set. That's why we are able to see these values properly. Next locator strategy is ID. For ID, in Android, it is the resource ID, and for iOS, it is the name property. Let's check that out. So here, let's see if we can find the element for this drag element by using its name property. So for this, let's click on this search for element option to check if our locator is working properly or not. So we'll select the ID here, and here I'll be giving the name property drag, and I'll click on search. So you can see that for iOS, the name property acts as an ID locator strategy. In Android, you will be able to see the ID locator directly in this particular section. So you don't need to worry about that for Android. For iOS, it is not directly visible as an ID property. That's why we are just using the name property here. Next is the class name locator strategy. So this class name is nothing but the name of the class for that particular element. Let's check this property in the inspector. So as you can see, for iOS, this class property is named as type. So here you can see that this element is of type XCUI element type button. But if you see the same element in Android, you will see the class property over there, and you can use that class name for finding this element by using the class name locator strategy. And the last locator strategy, which is common for both Android and iOS, is XPath. So this needs no introduction because this is the most popular locator strategies nowadays, as people mostly prefer using XPath. But this property is highly discouraged by the Appium community as well as the Selenium community because it makes your test flaky, and it is also the slowest performing locator strategy out of all the available locator strategies. Let's check out an example for XPath. So whenever you find any element on the inspector, this XPath property will be automatically created for you. In case if any element which does not have an accessibility ID or a normal ID set, you will see such warnings on that element. So it says that the XPath locator is not recommended and can lead to fragile tests. So it suggests that you talk to your development team to provide unique accessibility locators for these elements. So it is not advisable to use XPaths. There are multiple of different locator strategies which are available, which you can use, which I'll be showing you in just a moment. Now let's check out Android specific locator strategy. So this locator strategy is called UI Automator Selector. Let's check an example for this locator strategy. For UI Selector, we'll first open the UI Selector documentation. So this documentation is available on the Android website. You can see the UI Selector class and all the methods which are available in this class which you can use. Now let's check out an example. For this, I'll terminate this session and start an Android session. So this application has been launched in the Android emulator. Now suppose if I want to find any locator, for example, this particular locator home button, and if I want to use the UI selector locator, that I'll be building it using this search for element option. Here I'll select the UI automator, and here I'll be using a Java code like new UI selector with an empty parameter. This I'm initializing this UI selector class over here, and I'll be using a method. For example, if I want to use a method called description, where I'll be using this content description, I'll find that method which I can use. So in this documentation, I can scroll down and see that there is a method called description. So this description method will match the whole text which I'll be passing in this parameter. And if I want to match partial text, I can use description contains. So let's try with this description. I'll copy this method name, and in this field, I'll add description, and in the parameter, I'll give home, and I'll close the parameter. Here, I don't need to provide any semicolon. Just click on search button, and you can see that it is able to identify the element, and the same element is being highlighted in the background. So that's how you use the UI selector. Along with UI selector, you can also use UI scrollable. This class will help you in automatically scrolling to that element and making that element visible on the screen if it is not initially visible. Suppose that element is at the bottom of the screen and it is not initially visible, you can use this class which will help you to automatically scroll to that particular element, and then you can perform multiple different actions on that element. So let's check out an example how you can use this UI scrollable to scroll till a particular element. So here in this application, I'll go to this swipe page. Here you can see that there is an element at the bottom of the screen. So let's inspect this element first. Here in the inspector, I'll just refresh the page, and you can see that I'm able to inspect this element. So here first I'll just copy the description of this image. Now I'll scroll to the top of this page where this image is not visible. So on this inspector, I'll refresh the page. I'll click on the search for element button, and here just before this UI selector, I'll do new UI scrollable, and in that I'll use dot scroll into view. So this method is available here, scroll into view. Now in this scroll into view method, I'll be passing the UI selector locator for the element till which I want to scroll. For example, in this example, I am scrolling till a particular image which is available at the bottom of the screen. I'll be using that UI selector locator inside this scroll into view method. So here I'll be giving the description name as the name which I have copied initially, and I'll close the method parameter. So now in this scroll into view method, we have put the UI selector for the image till which we want to swipe. But in this UI scrollable, we need to pass the UI selector of the list view. I'll just copy this locator. so that it is available with me. And here you can see that this is a scroll view. So here I'll be using this swipe screen description. In this UI scrollable constructor, I'll be using another UI selector for this scroll view. New UI selector dot description. Here I'll be using swipe hyphen screen. Now I'll click on search. So you can see that it automatically scrolled till this particular image was displayed. As soon as it was displayed, it stopped the scrolling. That's how you can use this particular locator strategy to automatically scroll till that element is visible. Now let's check out iOS specific locator strategies. So there are two locator strategies which are specific to iOS. The first one is the iOS predicate string. So let's check out this example. So this application is launched in iOS simulator. Here I am selecting an element. Here you can see that iOS predicate string is automatically created for us. So this iOS predicate string is very similar to SQL queries. Where we normally use in a where condition, we give like a column name and equals to some value. So here you can combine different values. Here you can click on the documents link, which will take you to the documentations of this predicate string. Here you can see all the attributes which you can use for this predicate string. And there are different examples over here where you can combine multiple properties and create a predicate string out of it. Now the next locator strategy for iOS is iOS class chain. So this iOS class chain is very similar to XPaths, but it is much faster than XPaths. Let's check an example for this. So here in the inspector, you can also see an example where this inspector has created an iOS class chain for us. It is combination of classes and the predicate strings. So here you can see that a class name has been used in a format which is similar to XPath. And in the square bracket, we are using predicate strings. So here, when you click on this link, it will open the documentation for class chains, and you will see multiple different examples which you can use to create your own class chain. So it is more advisable to use class chains instead of XPaths or a predicate string, whichever you feel comfortable you can use. You can go through the documentation and understand each of those things, which will help you in understanding better about these two locator strategies. Now let's check out the other commands which we can execute on Appium Inspector. This first command is the device commands. Let's check out an example for this command on the Appium Inspector. So all the commands which we will be looking into are available under the commands tab. So here, now we will look into the device commands. Device commands are nothing but the commands which are specific to the devices. For example, you can put the file on the device, or you can get the file from the device to your machine. You can read the clipboard from the device and even set the clipboards. You can perform multiple operations related to the applications. So these are all the device specific commands which you can perform on the device using Appium Inspector. So there are some commands which are common for both Android and iOS. And there are some commands which are specific to a particular platform. For example, this iOS simulator is specific to iOS device, and the Android activity is specific to Android platform. Now let's take an example of app command. So here, before we proceed with this example, let's get the package name. Here you can select any element and you will get the package name. You will click on that and copy the package name. And in the commands, you can do multiple action on this application. For example, if you want to check that this application has been installed properly or not, you will click on this is app installed. And in the app ID, you will paste the package name. And when you click on execute command, you will get true. That means this application has been installed. You can even terminate the application by passing the package name. You will pass the package name and then you will click on execute, and the application has been terminated. Like this, you can perform all these different commands which are specific to the device. The next command is context commands. So let's take an example of this. So after device commands, we'll see the context command. So context command, here we'll also see the context. So the context command is basically which is related to the context of the application. Normally, if it is a native application, there will be only one context, which will be native. So before we look into this example, let's open our application on the emulator. I'll refresh the screen here, and here we'll get all the context list. You can see that this particular screen is having only native web context. And when we go to the web view context, since this application is a hybrid application, it can have web views also inside the application. So now I'll just refresh the page again. And when I do the get context list again, this time I will get two contexts. One is the native app and another is the web view. Now you can switch between the contexts by using the set context command, and you can switch context from the native app to the web view, and you can interact with the web view elements. So basically what will happen is whatever is the current context, you will be able to interact with that particular elements from that context only. So in this example, this is the native app is the current context. Whenever you interact with any of these elements, only the native app elements you will be able to communicate. In order to communicate with the web view element, you need to switch the context to the web view. Then only you will be able to communicate with the web view elements. Now we will look into the session commands. After context, we will look into session. So in the session, all these options are related to the session of current Appium connection. So for example, you can select the session capabilities and you can get the current session capabilities, and you can get more details about the sessions. Like you can set different timeouts like implicit timeout, page load timeout, script timeout, all these things. So for mobile, only this implicit timeout will be applicable. Page load and script load timeout is specific to web. Similarly, there is orientation. You can set the orientation, get the orientation, geolocations, interact with logs and get logs from the devices. You can even update the settings of Appium and even get the settings which are set by default on the device. So all these you can perform. And the last command is the web command. Let's check out an example. Now we will look into the web command. In the web, there is only one option, navigation. So all these options will only work when you are running a web session on the Appium Inspector. So instead of running an application, you will be running a browser. So let's quickly take an example where you will run a mobile browser using Appium Inspector. So I'll quit the session and I'll remove the app capability and add one more capability called browser name. And I'll be giving Chrome. And app wait capability is also not required. I'll remove that. Appium setting capability is also not required. I'll save this capability as a preset for Android web. Now I'll start the session again. So you can see that this Appium Inspector has opened in a web mode, and here you can see the browser Chromium. Now when you go in the commands tab and select web and navigation, when you do get URL, you will get the current URL of the browser. Similarly, you can even navigate to a different browser URL. You can refresh the page, click on refresh and will refresh the page. You can go back and all those things you can perform. Now let's check out how you can perform different finger gesture actions on the mobile device using Appium Inspector. So here we can check out an example of swipe in different directions. So to perform gestures, you will be going into the gestures tab. Here I have already created few gestures, as you can see. So I have covered all these different gestures in a separate video. You can check that out in the eye icon on the top. So you can check out that video later on. And in that video, I have covered all these different gestures, how you can create and perform such gestures using Appium Inspector. So for a quick demo, I'll select the swipe option and I'll first go into the swipe window. I'll refresh the page. And since all these gestures is already created, I just need to select the gesture and click on play button. And this is automatically working. I'll click again and I'm on the bottom. So like that, I have already created few gestures, which is working pretty well. Now let's connect to the Appium Inspector from web. So for this, we'll connect to the local device using the Web Appium Inspector. So if you go to the Appium Inspector GitHub repository, you will find the link to the Appium Inspector web instance over here. When you click on this, it will open the Appium Inspector in the web. Now, in order to connect to the local device, we need to start Appium server locally. So currently this server is already running. We'll stop this instance and we will start the server again using -- allow calls. So this flag is required in order to connect from Web Appium Inspector. I'll press enter. So you can see that this allow calls is set as true. And now let's copy this JSON capabilities in order to create the capabilities on the web. So here I'll click on the edit JSON and I'll replace this JSON with the JSON which we have already copied from the Appium Inspector application. Now I'll click on save. Now you can see that all these capabilities have been populated on these fields. I'll click on save as and give the name as Android WDI. So this will be saved on the web. Now in order to connect, I'll give the host name as localhost and click on start session. So we can see that Web Inspector is able to connect to the Appium server which we are running locally, and you can see the application getting launched. So now we go back to the browser. Here you can see that the application has been loaded successfully, and you can see that we are able to inspect the element. Here I can select the element. I can emulate a tab by clicking on the tab button, and you can see that the Web Inspector is able to communicate with our local device. So this is how you can use the Appium Inspector web version. So in this case, you don't require to download the Appium Inspector locally and install it. You can simply use this web version of Appium Inspector, and you can easily inspect the elements on your local device. That's it for today's video. If you have any suggestions, feedbacks, or comments related to the content which I'm creating on this channel, you can leave the comments in the comment section below. I would love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video and share it with your friends. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.